Why did so many African governments or leaders choose socialism? The reason why they chose socialism was because they felt colonialism and capitalism were the same. In fact, Lenin said capitalism was the extension of colonialism and imperialism. So when we gained our independence, African leaders didn't want to have anything to do with capitalism. It was exploitative. We wanted socialism because socialism was what we needed to fight the imperialists. Now, this is what Nkrumah of Ghana said. And also, Nyerere of Tanzania said, well, capitalism encourages individual acquisitiveness and competition. We don't want that. We want social justice. So we want socialism. So a lot of African leaders adopted socialism as an ideology. And by that ideology, socialism meant state participation in the economy. As a matter of fact, Nkrumah of Ghana said that under socialism, state participation in the economy was to be taken to a point of complete ownership of the economy by the government. Very, very, very frightening. And accordingly, Nkrumah nationalized all foreign companies, set up state enterprises, imposed price controls, gagged the press. Anybody who spoke out against Nkrumah was locked up. At the time of independence, Ghana's per capita income was $200 per head. And Ghana also had a respectable foreign exchange reserves of 400 million. 3 years into Nkrumah's socialist experiment, Ghana was bankrupt and borrowing money. Now, when Nkrumah was overthrown in 1966, Ghana had a foreign debt of about $1 billion with nothing to show for. We had all these state enterprises, but they were so hopelessly inefficient that in 1983, for example, about 20% of those state enterprises were producing using 40% of their capacity, industrial capacity. The rest was just, making losses upon losses upon losses. We had, a Black Star Line shipping agency. And it had so much redundant staff that in 1984, about 284 of them were paid for 3 years to stay home. It was not only in Ghana that you had all these state enterprises, Tanzania, Somalia. Somalia, for example, under socialism, state enterprises, Somalia built a plant to box bananas. But the amount of bananas the plant needed to break even exceeded the entire national output of bananas. A lot of the industries that were acquired under state ownership and also under state socialism were so haphazardly acquired that they were inefficient and very, very poorly designed. Ghana also built a state sugar factory. It took 3 years to complete that factory in 1979. And when it was completed, that factory laid idle for a year because somebody forgot to install a water supply system. If you go to Tanzania, for example, if I could give you a few statistics, many of the state enterprises established under Nyerere have been so grossly bloated, and also many of them are simply just not paying their way. Besides state enterprises, African governments also set up state farms to produce food for their people. Now, the state farms that Ghana set up was so inefficient that it could not even produce enough food to feed its own workers, let alone the nation. Now, the same experience also occurred in Tanzania, where under what was known as Operation Dodoma, many persons were uprooted and forcibly settled under some village community programs, which Nyerere called Injama. After that experiment in 1973, between 1974 and 1975, agricultural production plummeted. Tanzania used to be able to feed itself, but by 1983, it was importing close to a third of its food needs. There's no question, and I'm not going to bore you with giving you lots and lots of statistics. There's no question that the socialist experiment in Africa was a complete failure. Why did it fail in Africa? There were 4 reasons. 1, socialism created a very huge and unwieldy state bureaucracy. And that bureaucracy was characterized by waste, inefficiency, and mismanagement. The second reason why socialism failed in Africa was because the ideology itself created a whole paraphernalia of controls and regulations. Now, this is important. The controls and regulations breed corruption. And the problem is, when corruption appeared in Africa, because of controls, African governments wanted to correct the corruption, so they imposed more controls, as if more of the bad medicine will cure the patient. The third reason why socialism failed in Africa was because it resulted in an extreme concentration of powers in the hands of a tiny minority. That's the ruling elites. And this power in much of Africa was used to suppress. I should say that that power was abused, used to suppress the peasant majority. If you take a look at across Africa, there are 2 classes. You have the elite minority, and you have the peasant majority in almost every African country. The elite minority has concentrated all the power in itself and does not share power with the peasant majority. Now, there are 41 black African countries, and only 2 of them allow the peasant majority the right to vote. Many of these African leaders calling upon South Africa to give blacks the right to vote, which they should have, nobody questions that, themselves do not allow their own black African people the right to choose and vote for their leaders. The 4th reason, and this is most important, why socialism failed in Africa is because the ideology itself is alien to indigenous African culture. Very important. That ideology is alien to indigenous African culture. In indigenous Africa, all the means of production, with the possible exception of land, is privately owned. The fishing canoes, the nets, the huts, the bows and arrows, they're owned by peasants. They're not owned by their chiefs. The peasants go about their economic activities on their own initiative, not at the behest of their chiefs. And when the peasants produce any surplus, they take these surpluses to village markets. And now these village markets have always been open and free. The chiefs do not impose price controls on their peasants. And when the peasants make any profit, it's theirs to keep, not for the chief to expropriate. There were free markets in Africa before the white man set foot on the continent. And there was free trade on the continent before the European colonialists arrived. Before the explorers arrived in Africa, there were free trade routes, crisscrossing. In fact, Africa was there was a dense web of trade routes crisscrossing the continent. The most notable ones were those crossing the Sahara. And you have, trans-Saharan trade. These trade routes were in existence as far back as the 9th century. Africa was, quote unquote, discovered in the 16th century. Along the southern termini of these free trade routes were such market towns as Timbuktu. Timbuktu was a great market town, free trade market town. And Kano, Msalaga. There were also empires in Africa. There was the Mali Empire, there was the Ghana Empire, there was the Songhai Empire, and also the Great Zimbabwe Empire. The fortunes of these empires were built on free trade. This was what was there before Africa was colonized. The peasants are enterprising individuals, and they engage in trade and sell their produce on open free markets. In the traditional system, the chiefs do not operate state enterprises. In the traditional system, the chiefs also do not lock up dissidents. In the traditional system also, the chiefs do not impose foreign ideologies on their peasants or impose themselves on their peasants, nor does the chief declare himself president for life. The chiefs are appointed. They do not appoint themselves. That's the difference. And when a chief does not rule according to the will of the people, he is thrown out. In the indigenous system of government, there was participatory democracy. If you go to Ethiopia or Addis Ababa, you find the portraits of Marx and Lenin. It says a lot. And this is what it says. Now, here we are, black Africans. In the 60s, we said we did not want the white colonialist. So we hauled down the portraits of the European monarchs. And in Ethiopia, we put up the portraits of another set of white aliens. The peasants look at this and they say that is basic stupidity, 101. I'd like to stop here, and if you have any questions, you can ask.